Climate Asia is a social enterprise dedicated to strengthening the climate ecosystem in Asia through the capacity building of organizations, focusing on human resources, organization development, and thought leadership. Climate change is going to cause a massive shift in the fundamental functioning of several industries. Climate Asia is a new initiative bridging the gap by working with direct and indirect climate actors and organizations across the spectrum in various sectors. We will accomplish this through strategic HR/OD support, a digital platform to address HR needs, information dissemination related to climate funding, events and news, and thought leadership in the form of convenings, conferences, panel discussions, and dialogue building. We are launching the Conversation of Change, a video interview series centered around one of the most pertinent climate crises of our lifetimes. A Conversation of Change attempts to synthesize perspectives around climate action, skills, talent, and journey of various climate leaders and their role in the climate ecosystem. Today we have with us Mohammed Mofizur Rahman. He works in the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. He is a Bangladeshi-born environmental scientist and an educator, currently working as a scientist at Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, PIK, in Germany. Before joining PIK, he was an Alexander von Humboldt International Climate Protection Fellow and a research associate at the Institute for Resource Management for the Tropics and Subtropics. Mofizur is also an alumnus of Bihar's Environmental Leadership Program of University of California, Berkeley, USA. Mofizur has more than 10 years of working experience in various national and international organizations such as ICBDRP, GIS, ICCAD, and World Fish. He's working on climate change impact and adaptation in the large river deltas around the world. Sustainability and resilience thinking is the key to his work. Mofizur is a passionate educator and has taught courses on environmental social sciences in several universities, such as in Islamic University of Technology, Center for Sustainable Development and University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh, Cone University of Applied Sciences in Germany, and Anand Fellowship for Climate Action at Anand National University, India. He brings his field research into the classroom to educate the new generation using transdisciplinary methodologies and combining natural social science disciplines. Thank you, Mofizur, for joining us and giving us your time. First of all, I'm very curious to know that could you describe the work that you have done and are currently doing at Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, and what does your role as an environmental scientist look like?
Very good. Thank you, Pritha. I'm very new at PIK. I have joined here in June this year. So I'm very fresh and very new in this institute. But PIK is a very reputed organization in India, in Germany and worldwide. It does research on a broad spectrum of issues, starting from climate modeling to understand the pathways where we are heading and where we should be heading. It works on sustainable development. It works on several issues of natural resources, for example, food, water. It also works on energy transition, decarbonization, and so on. But it's very famous for a lot of modeling exercise, where lots of cutting-edge models been developed and housed at PIK. It's a very international place where people from many nationalities were working with a common goal. But few key words I would like to introduce when we talk about PIK. So planetary boundary is something heavily discussed in the PIK research atmosphere. So you might be knowing this concept of planetary boundary was introduced by Jan Rockström and his colleagues a decade ago. So if you want to operate in a safe space on the planet, so we need to know the boundaries in different uh, uh, different Earth system component. For example, in CO2, we have a boundary that we should be keeping our limit to 350 parts per million of CO2. So that's a boundary. So in other uh, uh, Earth system component, we also have boundaries. So this planetary boundary is an interesting concept. I think we have 9 or 10 this kind of boundary, and we're monitoring how far we are, and if we want to keep ourselves within the safe limit, what should we be doing? So that's one of the component. Then the second thing a lot of people here do is tipping points. I think it's more or less the similar concept. So we have to know uh, where we what's the threshold, and the beyond the threshold we might be collapsing. So where the thresholds are uh, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of climate, in terms of water, in terms of other pollutants and so on. But we are very focused on climate and sustainable development. And my role, I work mostly in the issues in South Asia, uh, mostly in Bangladesh. Uh, so this moment I'm working on issues related to water security. I also have the research project related to sea level rise and salinity. And in many coastal areas worldwide, the sea level is rising, and due to sea level rise and other anthropogenic reason, the salt water is going to the soil and the water, and it's become saline, and it has impact on health, livelihood, and ecosystem service. So first of all, I would like to explore what are the impacts, and then I'm also interested to look at solutions, like what can be done. Thank you.
Did you already know that there is something known as planetary boundaries and these other concepts, or is it something that you picked up throughout your 15 years of experience? And are there other learnings, other key learnings that you had in your career journey?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question, actually. So there are a lot of issues I have learned over my education and over the work. So most of the things I have learned by doing. Uh, so as a Bangladeshi national, I have very different idea about nature. The way we learned about nature in our school and from our cultural context is a bit different than the way nature and landscape been viewed here in Western academia and Western world. In Indian subcontinent, we have very different views about nature. So I think my first learning is this different viewpoint of looking at the same thing. The second thing, what I have learned that this concept of resilience, when I was a intern at a Stockholm Resilience Center, and this resilience was an abstract idea at that moment to me. I had no idea how to measure it, what does it mean, how to interpret it. But when I started working in the field, in the context of climate adaptation, in the context of natural resource management, and I slowly started to understand how can we translate this abstract idea uh, in the action of people. And I'm very glad to tell that when I look at the landscape in Bangladesh where I work, people are extraordinarily resilient. Uh, so just to give you an example, I have seen after a flood, um, still people have lot of hope to rebuild what they have lost, and the time always take to get back to the similar or more or less similar stage is not very long, and people help each other. um, Even though the people who are helping, they're also suffering in the same time, but during their sufferings they don't forget to help actually. So these are the thing, like these local stories from the people always inspire me, and I find this state resilience concept is not very abstract. It has we can actually translate it to real world when I work in the context of disaster, in the context of adaptation or natural resource management. um, and then sustainability is something also interesting to me because I spent a year in India, in Indian Institute of Technology, working with some of my favorite professors on the issues of sustainability. And there also, I tell you that the way I learned in school, the concept of sustainability and the way we practice, I think historically we are way more sustainable. We have a lot of sustainability practice in our daily life. It's come from our spirituality, from religion, from social cohesion, and thousands of years of cultural um, uh, cultural background. Uh, so I start thinking that I would love to bring all those things to my research, to my discussion. Yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, this resilience thinking and sustainability uh, is basically the fundamentals of my concept, and which is embedded into my historical upbringing. Um, then the concept of planetary boundary I have learned in the university, and I work with colleagues who work on this issue, and I find it quite interesting um, and useful to monitor and to design the world we want to see in the future. And for taking action, this is, I think, crucially important to understand some sort of framework. And planetary boundary is interesting framework, and it gives us a way to design the future. Thank you.
So you described how community-based structures and the ideas of sustainability and resilience are already inbuilt in South Asia, and how you're trying to make them into a less abstract concept. So my question would be that how do you think more global attention can be brought to the climate resilience of countries like India and Bangladesh, as you had mentioned, because we suffer from ravaging floods and then the next month we just go back to normal. And what do you think we can learn from it? What do you think we should observe more globally?
And, this is interesting actually. Like when somebody tell me that I want to understand floods, and I would always say that if you go to Bangladesh or if you go to India, that's the best place to learn about floods. And like for me, certain things, for example, if somebody want to learn climate change adaptation, and I think we are a living laboratory for them actually. They should come and learn from reality. Um, so still, this is very one way. We come to Western world for education. We still think that we have many things to learn from them. But if you see carefully, they have made a lot of historical mistake, and we shouldn't be doing that because and also the pathways are different. Their development pathway and our development pathway is not the same. So what I feel, there are many things to learn from us, And even the research should be very transdisciplinary, and it's not that the researcher from high profile institute fly to our part of the world and and tell us what to do. We should be we should have our own organic growth of understanding and describing and solving our own problem. That's one thing, and I think this knowledge should go both way. So we should have something to learn from them, and they have something to learn from us. And when it comes to climate adaptation, climatic problem, climatic impact, and resilient thinking, I think we have much to offer to the world. Uh, Most interestingly, in West, climate change actually been developed in Western academia, and the idea traveled all through our part of the world. Um, but personally, I believe that uh, this notion of we should learn from Western academia should change over time. Uh, that's one of the reason, if you know, that Minya Chatterjee started this program of Anand Fellowship of Climate Action, and the reason I joined that, to start our conversation, to bring example uh, from the place which is unseen, which bring the voice of the people which is unheard, you know. Uh, so that's one of my interest to join the program, and I think we should be doing this more and more.
So, since you mentioned knowledge transfer from both the sides, especially ours, since our voices are unheard, what do you think are the various challenges we face when it comes to knowledge transfer or areas of capacity building when it comes to climate change, and especially from an institutional lens? What challenges do you think we face in that space?
There are many challenges. I wrote a paper on climate and health research domain and explain what are the challenges in that just particular domain. But if I look at the wide spectrum, then there are challenges and manifold. Number one is we are not yet prepared. We need preparation because we need a lot of qualified people. We have a lot of qualified people, but in the context of climate, they are not yet ready to take action. For example, in public health domain, I have looked at in Bangladesh, there are very good public health research institutions, very qualified people, but if you look at the curricula, it's not really very multidisciplinary. So a public health professional doesn't have very good idea about climate, but they're very good at public health, but not very good at climate. So when they want to solve a public health issue which is relevant to climate, I think they're not equipped. So this curriculum, the way we educate our young generation is very fragmented, very discipline focused. It's not very multidisciplinary. That one front. Then it comes to funding. If you look at our funders, the funding agency, the way they operate, so health in agency when they fund health project, they're very focusing on a particular health issue, but that health problem is actually an outcome of an environmental issue, but the environmental agency is not really talking with the health agencies. So the agency operate in their own silos. So that's another challenge. So even I I talk to many donor agencies, and every agency have their environmental wing and health wings, then water wings. Then uh, they're very separate. So it's not really, they're not talking each other. That's another problem. Uh, then another challenge I feel uh, there are there are problems of um, of course, we recognize climate change is a bigger threat, but when it comes to an action, we sometimes I feel like somebody else will solve it. But I think uh, this is not happening in the last 20 years, and this will not happen, what I believe. Then another big challenge when it comes to research, like, when you go to a agency for funding, they will say, come up with some example. But developing that example, also you also need funding. They will always say, explain us with an example, with a success story and things like that. But having those success story, you need to do research. So you have to start from somewhere. So if for example, I know from Green Climate Fund, we wanted to apply long ago with a project, and they said we need a example which already been tested. But if nobody has done before, how it's been, uh, how we can prove it actually. So as I'm talking from the climate change and health lens because I know much about it. So then I see it's a vicious cycle. From somewhere you need to start, and if everybody want to just have a lot of example, for building example, we need research as well. So that's another challenge. Then then there are some common challenges, we all know more or less. We have some issues with governance and some issues with corruptions and so on. That's also have larger impacts on. And yeah, and finally, I would like to say that we need a lot of young talented people with good education on climate, because uh, this is a problem which is new. So the so it needs kind of a generation which think differently, think out of the box. The way we created the problem, in the same way we won't solve it. So yeah, and finally, I would like to say that uh, very often climate change uh, in Western academia look at is possible to fix technically. It's a carbon problem, but I think this problem is different for us. It's an issue related to justice. It's an issue related to inequality. It's issues related to um, our growth, economic growth, and it has it issues related to poverty. So we have to uh, connect the climate issue with several other agendas. So for us, it's not solely a carbon problem. It's way more than that. It has something to do with our colonial past. It's something to do with uh, the way we look at the world, actually.
So, do you think that to reimagine what we have been taught uh, before about climate, about the other interdisciplinary topics that might just merge, do you think fellowships are a good way to help young talent understand about community and all these so-called abstract concepts? What skills do you think fellowships can inculcate in young talent? Are they a good way to start off your climate journey?
like I personally, I think like in we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So many people are already doing. So doing a lot of solution, like solution related to water, solution related to energy. Um, so that they're doing, but it's not yet touching the climatic goal. So I think this gap we need to fill it up. So if somebody working on renewable energy, uh, without knowing how uh, it can be connected with the global climatic goal and how it can be improved and so on. If someone might be an entrepreneur, uh, but the entrepreneurship uh, can can be attached to a goal of meeting kind of climatic target on some extent. So I don't like when people say that we have to start from the scratch, but rather where we are from there, the gap need to be filled up. That's my own view. So we have to find out people who are from engineering background, from an economist, an architect, whoever doing uh, uh, great work in their own field. So it have to bring into a climatic framework the, that what good aspect it can bring to protect our climate and solve particular climatic issue.
What advice would you have to that particular person who is transitioning into that climate space, like you described, somebody who's an engineer, somebody who's working in finance? So if that somebody is making that conscious decision to shift, then what advice would you have for them, and somebody who is starting afresh?
uh, I think that's an interesting question. Like, uh, giving an advice is very hard sentence for me, but I would say this is an existential crisis this moment. And uh, I think we're all whatever from different discipline, what we are all working for a common goal, and it's the issue related to our planet and our existence actually. uh, but at the same time, uh, I personally feel like climate change also brought a lot of potential, a lot of new jobs, the new way of designing, the new way of thinking, uh, the working uh, with nature. Uh, so it's not only that for moral reason we'll be working, but it's also an avenue for growth and progress, and also the job prospects are quite good in that field. So if somebody get trained in the uh, on climate solution arenas, I think there are higher possibility of getting hired, because we don't have much qualified people we need. You see, we are big continent, and it's a new thing. And uh, if we look at academic institution, how many institution is offering degree on this? Very few. If we look at how many people get trained in India every year on climate change, very few. So it's still become an opportunity. It's kind of an opportunity, but this shouldn't be opportunity for few. This should be accessible thing for many people. This education shouldn't be like, okay, I got a chance to go Harvard and got a climate degree. This is opportunity, but solving such a large scale problem, we need many people in all frontier, and there is no single solution. So it's not the solar panel will solve it, or it's not that only adaptation, only renewable energy. This should be multiple combination of multiple things. So I think there are a lot of potential for young people to learn and work. And I think the climate related job will be booming in future if we can create the transition which is needed for solving this.
Talking about another booming, I would say, subsector that is there in the climate space is geoengineering. So recently, the University of Cambridge created the Center for Climate Repair to develop new methods for SRM and cloud brightening. The Australian government has been testing marine cloud brightening this year to cool the water temperatures near the Great Barrier Reef. Geoengineering seems to be a very promising future as a means to buy humanity more time to cut greenhouse gas emissions, according to mainstream publications like the New York Times. Could you comment on the possibilities of geoengineering in the context of climate change?
Yeah, geoengineering, it's quite controversial. It has a lot of issues of many would say there's slopes, it's a slippery slope. Many would say it has moral hazard and so on. And it has a lot of governance issue. Who will govern it? Like who will be doing it? Still, we haven't done much experiment in real world. It's like, and many are just idea or just computer model, but not real world experiment. But what I believe in developing country, a lot of people are becoming interested, and still I think we should be knowing this properly. What is it and how it will affect if we really have to do it in future. But there are much to think about it. Actually, there are much research is needed, the much discussion is needed, debate is needed. Yeah, as geoengineering have a lot of controversy, but I believe in developing country we should have wider discussion about it.
So I'll be talking about a less controversial market, which is the renewable energy market, where South Asia has been having a lot of opportunities. So why do you think that there is a booming landscape for that in South Asia now? And how do you think young people can take advantage of this opportunity?
I think the number one, the price is going down. That's pretty good. And if you look at like I know from even though I'm not an energy researcher, but if you look at Bangladesh, the household level solar rooftop made a very good example. What I learned from other that it has a lot of prospects in South Asian region, and we have large population and a lot of remote places which is not yet connected to the main grid, and it created a lot of job actually. So from all those point, I'm very hopeful about it. But as I'm not an energy researcher, I can't really tell in detail. Yeah.
So I have the last question, which I am personally very curious about. So currently, how do you disconnect from work? Because you're an environmental researcher and you, as you said, you interact with a lot of donor agencies, you have your day packed. So how do you disconnect? And do you have any book recommendations for us? Any podcast recommendation related to climate that you would personally recommend?
I have a lot of favorite book. Maybe I write you an email with a list. So this moment were no, I read all the time, and the book I am reading this moment is this the Traveling Economist, I think the title, and it says the so three main indicators of success: access to energy, lowering fertility rate, and adult literacy. If a country can ensure these three, this country will go further, will really make some progress. A few days ago, I was reading another book, which is also I like very much. It says, "We are the climate." So it says not the CO2 and the atmospheric phenomenon. What matters, the matter most is our action, what we do, every moment, every conscious decision we take, every conscious or unconscious or subconscious. Our decision matters actually. Like where we will be traveling, where we will be going for holidays, what meal we will take. You know, we eat vegetable or we go for beef or we go for chicken. For where we are eating, and the dress is coming from which company, how many dress we buy per year, all these things, starting from your shower, like how much water you use for your shower. So in your daily activity, what you do actually, that's really matters. So we actually the designer for the climate for the future. So if we don't act, then the design will be horrible. So the title was interesting. The book was also very, very interesting. We Are the Climate. I liked it a lot. Um, yeah, but I can give you a list in email sometime. Yeah. Then you mean like how can I disconnect myself? Um, I have studied biodiversity actually. I studied ecology and biodiversity. So I spend a lot of time in the field close to nature. For example, I studied wetlands, which is muddy, stinky wetlands. But that's my favorite landscape. Then, I studied coast, uh, which is not really always a good tourist destination. If you think about a mangrove, it sounds very interesting. Sundarban is beautiful, but if you want to walk, it's not really that spectacular for for a regular tourist. It's a different adventure. It's a very muddy place, and it's very remote, hard to reach areas. But I love those kind of places. I go time to time. I spend time in forests and wetlands and grasslands. So I work on different ecosystems, and I love to be with nature. And I take as a conscious decision that I want to spend this amount of time there.
So you are trying to say that to connect more with what you do and what you're passionate about, you should go spend some more time in what you're working towards.
Exactly. In the office, I mostly work with the text and numbers and with the computer. But what we write in as the text is about a forest. So if you don't spend time in the forest and when you write about it, of course you will never be able to write what's up there. It's your own interpretation. But if you don't really go there and be with it, I think it's very hard to write.
You have inspired me to visit Sundarban at least once in my life. So
Yeah.
thank you, Mofizur. This brings us to the end of this conversation of change. Thank you so much.